Amanda Seales actually went on to Jubilee and faced 20 black conservatives. And it was one moment that in particular pissed me off. And it's not going to be what y'all assume would piss me off in a dialogue like that. So I'm going to get to that last. But I did just want to address Amanda Seales and what she was actually arguing, some of her definitions for things, specifically liberalism and radicalism. I want to start there, and then I'm going to get into a critique of the black conservative position, the one that actually pissed me off the most. So let's get into it.
Not provided, and what is that pool that is being created? And then we're looking at, all right, where can that wage come from in terms of how has that wage been applied? So there are spaces where this is very clear. I think the last thing that you asked about was the difference between liberal and radical.
Yeah, please.
Ultimately, the concept of liberalism is really just not Republican, right? I mean, that's essentially what it's become.
I would disagree with that, but I understand that's your stance. There's
a very generic concept of what liberalism is, in the sense that it's simply saying that I am a part of the bipartisan mind frame, but I am not a Republican. It's a mindset. It doesn't always show up in action, but it's a mindset that says, you know, I don't support extremes in certain ways, or, you know, I want the government to show up in certain ways. You know, I know there's a conservative point of view that says there should be less government, but even though it just says that, the action is very different. The radical mind state simply is living opposite to our colonizers, which is an imperialist, capitalist mind state, and radical blacks do not believe that that is any way for us to have liberation.
Thank you for explaining that.
And thank you for...
All right, so here we go again, man. Amanda Seales pre-proposes that the worldview of colonizers is the default or dominant set of values in our society. And I would disagree. I think that it's a false presupposition. I think that whites are the minority in this country. Just from like a colonizer perspective, we have a lot of white immigrants, we have a lot of black immigrants, we have a lot of so-called brown immigrants and stuff like that. And so the presupposition actually falls apart when you consider how diverse the United States has been in recent years. And in fact, it's part of why you are seeing this sort of rise in nationalism in certain cases. So I think she's wrong. I think not only is she wrong, I think she's completely off the mark, but there's something else happening here too, that I think needs some serious unpacking. And it's that being radical in her framing means intentionally flipping or rejecting those values, basically that the colonial class has, or the colonial value. Like, we have to repudiate these colonial values, right? But this actually assumes that the colonizers' norms are the standard by which all other worldviews are measured. But that's observably false, because Black Americans have not only lived under these norms as like subjects, but we've also shaped these norms and resisted the norms we didn't want for our communities, and we've even transformed norms. So Black Americans are integral to what Western civilization or Western culture even is. We've influenced art, language, politics, and of course institutions. Like, we've done mad things. We've influenced fashion, etc. This is our home too. And the way she's talking as if we should repudiate our home. We should repudiate our identity as Black Americans, as Westerners. We are Westerners. We are not African. We are not Indian. We are not Chinese or any of those things. We are American. We are Black American. And in fact, many of our lineages can be traced back hundreds of years before any colonization even took place. And so there's a mutual relationship here. There's a mutual relationship insofar as we are developing culture together. It's a shared inheritance. It's not the white man's culture. It's not the Black man's culture. It's our culture together. And white and Black culture are subcategories of American culture. So for instance, let's take the blue jean. We all saw the Sydney Sweetie thing that had everybody upset. And I talked about this on YouTube, but I'll talk about it again here, and just basically simplify my position as it relates to this specific topic. So when we think about the blue jean, we think about cowboys. There was a relationship that whites and black had as it relates to the blue gene. So on one hand, it was called Negro cloth because of the way how durable it was to basically, protect the bodies of slaves and sharecroppers, etc., farmers who were working in the fields. On the other hand, Levi Strauss is the inventor of the blue gene as we know it. Now, the materials he got from the indigenous cultures. The indigenous cultures already had the materials to make the blue gene. Yet, fast forward to today, and we see the Black American and American identity in general stapled by the blue gene. So there's something called an American tuxedo. Some people say Canadian tuxedo. Okay, fine, but the point still remains. The blue gene is something that we both whites and blacks, quote unquote, had a shared relationship to creating this sort of influence that the world sees as like, oh, that's an American thing. But it was both cultures. It wasn't just one culture. It wasn't just the other. It was both cultures that had a hand in making that blue gene so popular that it's banned or was banned in certain parts of the world because it was a symbol of the Western ideal. It was a symbol of the West. And so being radical then isn't simply about rejecting Western norms because Black Americans are a part of the Western identity necessarily. So when you frame the radical position as Black, as just anybody who's repudiating Western culture and things like that, this is not an ideal that Black Americans who've contributed to this culture should hang on to as true. It's actually bullshit, if you want to be honest. Why should we take the radical position when the radical position is trying to convince me to turn away from my culture? That doesn't make any sense. Why should we take the radical position when the radical position is trying to teach me that what my ancestors built no longer it doesn't suffice. It's not good enough. What type of pro-Black position is this? I don't believe that. And this is why I say you cannot be a pro-Black leftist. There is no such thing. Because oftentimes it's the way that you're defining your position in opposition to the colonizer that actually reduces the Black identity. So defining radicalism as simply the opposite of whatever the colonizer is doing risks reducing the Black identity to a reactive role instead of affirming our independence as, self-directing people. And it actually upholds white supremacy. How? Well, white supremacy is a system that maintains and refines race as a primary axis of identity, social organization, and political action. And so any identity that centers racial categories as essential and immutable contributes to the maintenance of the racialized worldview created by white supremacy. So Amanda Seals defines radicalism as living opposite to our colonizers. And when we say colonizers, we're referring to white people who came to America. Therefore, by centering the colonizer, which refers to the white race, Seals' definition of radicalism maintains the race-based worldview that white supremacy originally imposed. Systems that maintain the structure of white supremacy, even under inverse moral aims, because that's what y'all gonna say, oh, it's her moral aims. They're functionally equivalent to white supremacy and perpetuate a radical order. A racial order. Therefore, her definition of radicalism is a form of white supremacy. So that's just the bottom line. Anytime your definition is centered upon a subject-object relationship where in order for me to live out my truth as a Black American, I have to see myself as oppressed by another group, because this is all contingent upon oppression as a fact of what it means to be a Black American, but not only just a fact of what it means to be a Black American, but also the whole of what it means to be a Black American. And that's really where the issue comes for me. You cannot talk in a way where you're trying to reduce our relationship with our culture down to we hold the values of the colonizer. Because our ancestors fought for every war. They fought in every war that I know of. They fought in every war that I know of, our ancestors fought for, died for. Even before the Declaration of Independence. Even before the Declaration of Independence, our ancestors were fighting the very colonization, making deals with the very colonization that you're talking about. The very colonizer that you're trying to point out and say is something to be repudiated is the very colonizer that our ancestors had a relationship with, rather it be violent, rather it be aggressive. Bro, we were aggressively against these people in some cases, yes, but also as a means for survival and preservation of our culture, we made deals, and naturally we came to an understanding that the right way to go about this is to let them have what's theirs and keep what's ours for us. And so what I'm saying is that it's our ancestors that thrived under segregation and Jim Crow. It's our ancestors that thrived in conditions that, if you ask me, just considering the brunt of what they faced back then, they produced better outcomes with what they had than what we have today. So Amanda Seales, we don't want to be radical. I think it was a radical idea for us to integrate the way that we did. And see, this is where it becomes complicated for people who say that radicalism is just repudiating what the colonizer built. But it's like the whole time your ancestors were doing for themselves and building and doing well. You want to say, oh, they burned it down, they burned it down, they burned it down. Okay, fine. But that doesn't mean that places like Washington, D.C. don't exist, where Benjamin Banneker had a Black man had a hand in building this nation's capital. That doesn't change the fact that because our ancestors served in every war that I know of, we sort of have been conditioned to see the fade as like a Black thing, even though it's actually comes from like white culture, and Black culture made it deeper, better, hard. You know what I'm saying? So basically it's like, think about it like this. When our ancestors were serving in the military, they had to wear the high and tight. And as time went on, you see Black people, we wear, you know, we want to say dreads is not like a white style. I would agree with that. That's true. But the fade is not a Black style. At least it wasn't. We wear dreads with the fade now. You get what I'm trying to say? Like, we wear dreads with the fade now. So it's not the same type of relationship. It's not the same type of bond. You know what I'm saying? That y'all trying to make it out to be. It's not all oppression. We make the best of our situation, and the best of our situation, no matter what it is what we call Black culture. So to say, and sometimes that means that we have to have a relationship to the so-called colonizer. We do the fade better than anybody. We do the fade better than anybody. We do the waves. We do the dreads with the fade. We do what do they call it? 3D fades even now. It's not a high and tight no more. But that's our contribution. It's a small contribution. I'm trying to keep it lighthearted. But that's our contribution. That's just a small example of how quick the blue jean and the fade. 2 examples of how quick we end up erasing our own culture when we take radicalism and repudiation of Western values as a whole as something that we should strive for, when we start to believe in that. And so it's just weird to me. And I also think it just has to be a self-defeating argument, right? If I'm saying I want to repudiate the ways of the colonizer, and in the same breath, I'm exercising the rights that my ancestors alongside the colonizers fought for, died for, established. So again, we go back to ethnocentrism. So to be ethnocentric is to rally around an idea. We are ethnocentric in, give me 1 second. Let me ban this person. All right, so give me one moment. Let me ban this person. Okay. All right, cool. Now, to be ethnocentric is to rally around an idea or some shared ideas, some shared values, etc. And the reason why that's important for this conversation is the West has rallied around liberalism, which is the maximization of freedom. So when we talk about the maximization of freedom, we have to consider things like freedom of speech, freedom of religion, democracy as a principle, not as a form of government, but as a principle. And when we actually unpack that, when we actually unpack what we've decided to collectivize around in the West, what we realize is that it doesn't actually make sense to try to repudiate it, because the thing that we're using to repudiate it is the thing that allows us to repudiate it in the first place. So it seems self-defeating to me, and it's like a nuanced position that I'm giving right now. I'm not necessarily trying to speak in absolutes, but in general, this type of radicalism is the type of radicalism that perpetuates cultural erasure and white supremacy. And speaking of liberalism, the next thing that I wanted to get in was basically like how she's defining liberalism. Because she says that liberalism is just not Republican. But of course that oversimplifies the whole, I don't know what I'm talking about. But basically it's like, it oversimplifies, excuse me, I don't know why my language was so bad there. But basically, when you say that liberalism is just not Republican, you're oversimplifying the tradition of liberalism. And this is a really important point because of the first point that I made about ethnocentrism. We in the West are all liberals in the classical sense, so long as we aren't radical, because a real radical is somebody who's actually trying to destroy liberalism, individualism, freedom from government oppression, etc. That's liberalism. So to reduce it down to just not Republican shows how ignorant Amanda Seales actually is. And again, I always say there is a such thing as expert knowledge. There is a such thing as real information versus field information. And so liberalism, like I've already, I think it was last stream even, that I already explained this point, but I'll explain it again. It's a long-standing Western tradition that values individual freedom, and that value isn't exclusive to like Republicans or Democrats, because Republicans and Democrats are both trying to figure out, at least at a popular level, at least amongst the voters. Now, when you want to get into what the politicians are doing, that okay, maybe we can have a different conversation. But when it comes to the voters, your everyday Democrat is just trying to figure out how to maximize individual freedom, just trying to figure out how to pay bills, just trying to figure out how to get by. Same thing on the Republican side. So we're still a liberal country in the classical sense. And so to say that liberal means just not Republican, it shows how ignorant, it shows how uninformed Amanda Seales actually is. And the fact that in this Jubilee debate, not one black conservative was smart enough to say, that definition of liberalism doesn't make sense because we just try and maximize individual freedom. That lets me know that those people are just as ignorant as she is. That's what that lets me know. That lets me know that those people are just as ignorant as she is. So like Sonny pointed out, I choose neither, but that's a different conversation for a different day. So by framing radicalism as rejecting liberalism outright, Amanda Seales is essentially saying that radicals should reject the idea of maximizing individual freedom. And obviously, that's a pretty big leap because most people, including many Democrats, still see freedom as a core value. And so, Amanda Seales, you don't think freedom is a core value? You don't think liberalism is a good thing, Amanda Seales? You think radicalism is a real solution or alternative to trying to figure out how to maximize freedom? That's what you think? Because remember, liberalism saved the world from religion, for example, but also from government oppression, for example. If I open up Federalist paper number 10, we can hear a dialogue about how important it is to have private property. How quick we forget these things. Why this country was founded. What the modern philosophers who gave you liberalism were actually trying to do. So this post-liberal idea, especially black post-liberal ideas, where we want to repudiate liberalism that we don't even understand, it's just disappointing. And for the tools that went on Jubilee, sat up there and gave no pushback to this fundamental problem. Well, what's she saying? I need y'all to do some reading. I need y'all to go read the Federalist Papers. I need y'all to go read parts of Hegel's, not Phenomenology of Spirit, but Hegel's Philosophy of Right. Go read that. What he says about the ethical substance. Go read what he talks about. Freedom is actualization, loosely speaking. Go read what John Locke wrote about. Self-evident truths. You speak like a Lockean. Do you understand Locke at all? I don't even agree with Locke because social contract theory is bullshit on my view. But I'm just saying, in general, you have to have an understanding of these things if you're going to call yourself a conservative and sit up here and try to say that you're advocating for the better of this country. And that's only the case because you went on a platform with 10+ million subscribers and you let somebody tell you that liberalism is just not Republican. You should be ashamed of yourself. Every black conservative that went on that platform, you should be ashamed of yourself. You should be ashamed of yourself for being so ignorant. You're just as ignorant as she is. Maybe the lady, she did say, I don't know if I agree with how you're defining liberalism. But she didn't actually give an answer. So I'll give her grace and say it was a great question. That's first of all, it was a great question. Second of all, she asked she knew that the answer was wrong. And so she did push back, but she didn't fight. And that's what I wish she would have done. But the rest of y'all are pitiful. Y'all are pitiful. And so I think this rejection of liberalism is ridiculous. I think it's ridiculous. I mean, there's so many people you can read. You can read Johann Fichte, another modern philosopher. You can read, because the point And the point of me bringing this stuff up is not to name drop, is not to sound intelligent, none of those things. The point of me bringing this stuff up is so that you can understand that the debate in Western society has been, how do we maximize individual freedom? What is freedom and how do we maximize it? How do we get the most of it? What makes the most sense? What system makes the most sense so that I can have my things and you can have yours? That was the conversation that the modern political philosophers in large were having. Many of them. Not all, but many of them. I don't know what Spinoza was doing. I'm still trying to figure him out. So then it's this talk about systemic racism. But if systemic racism is in need of addressing, how are you going to reject liberalism wholesale? How is that a solution? Wouldn't you be tossing out the very commitment to individual freedoms that are actually a part of solving those very injustices? Right? Like, what isn't part of it? Isn't part of the conversation? Isn't part of the dialectic? Hey, we want freedom just like everybody else. So what is it? Are you a communist? Do you want to use government authority to create equal circumstances for everyone? Not necessarily based on process, but based on outcome. Is the judgment being made for you to determine who's being treated unfairly? Is that the assumption? That it's the outcomes that make people unequal? Or is it the system? Say, for instance, the felony. That's a systemic issue. That's a legislative issue. You address the legislative issue, and then you evaluate the outcomes. You can look at them to say, I wonder. Outcomes is a way for you to ask questions, but it's not a way for you to diagnose. You cannot just diagnose the system as racist because of the outcomes. When you do that, you give racist legislators a pass. You give them an out. Because then they can say, oh, well, you're never going to defeat racism. There's no way you're going to defeat racism. There's no way you're going to fight against racism. Why aren't you going to fight against racism? Well, because racism is inherent. Prejudice, bias is inherent. I don't like them because this. I don't like them because that. I like their food, but I don't want to live next to them. I like their food, but I don't want to live next to them. Do I think equality is, somebody in chat said, do you think equality is pragmatic? I think equality is bullshit. That's what I think. I think man is not equal to himself on different days. That's what I think. I think you treat people as individuals because God made them individually. God judges them as individuals. So I disagree with the groupthink. All blacks are like this. All whites are like this. All these people are like that. All those people do this. I disagree with that. And so in that sense, I think people are equal and deserve equal human rights. The question is, what do we mean by human rights? This is where liberalism becomes a problem, because we start to expand the scope of what it is that we're trying to do. And so I think equality as a political goal is rhetorical, mostly. I don't think people actually think about it that much, because if they did, they would realize that it's not necessarily the best way to think about solving political issues. Are we equal or not? because there are differences between people. There are differences between people. If you have a set of twins and one twin goes on to become a lawyer and the other twin goes on to become a drug dealer, but their circumstances in living and everything was the same, even the stars were the same, even the way the constellations for my astrology people, even the constellations were almost the same based on the maps that people use for astrology. Yet the outcomes of these two individuals are so radically different. Why do we think we can manufacture equal outcomes? Why do we think that we can move people like chess pieces on a chessboard? Why do we think that? Why do we think that? Even in communism, in practice, not some fancy, flashy definition that somebody might want to use, but even in communism, everybody ain't equal. You want to know why everybody ain't equal? Because somebody got to be enforcing how many flavors of hot sauce we gonna have. Somebody got to be enforcing when you get to have your leisure activities and when you get to go to work. So that person is the authority over your life. How is that equal? So no, I don't believe that equality is the goal that all people should seek for, strive for. Because in praxis, it's not necessarily